Mine. And they say I pace too much when I talk, so the camera has a tough time following me. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. So my name's John Checco. I'm past president of New York Metro InfraGard, a FBI outreach program. It deals with cybersecurity and some physical security. I'm also a member of ASIS, a physical security group, and some other cybersecurity groups, which I've mentioned earlier. So I want to dovetail on Paul and Brian's presentation about cyber physical coordinated attacks. So as I mentioned earlier, when I started off the day, I'm actually disappointed that security isn't embedded everywhere. Security should be commoditized. It should be commonplace. And nothing says this more than all these upcoming attacks that are cyber initiated, but they have physical effects to them. So we're going to go through a few of these today. So let's talk about in the financial sector, right? Obviously, cryptocurrency is not so much a cyber attack, but it is a method for which other bad things happen, right? And they're mostly indirect. But if you've read the headlines, Iran is now using cryptocurrency to purchase items to get around U.S. sanctions, right? There are also obviously cryptocurrencies used in the black market. It's I'll say non-traceable, but that really doesn't mean much. And it really funds terrorism directly. So, if you think about a kill chain, right now, anything we put in place, sanctions or monitoring, cryptocurrency is just going to bypass. Other things we saw, we heard, what was it, back in 2011 with HSBC modifying SWIFT payments to hide counterparties. Has anybody read anything about Credit Suisse in the past few days? Think it's related? Think it's similar? Right? So what's happening here is the banks are not, well, I can't make any suppositions about these banks doing it purposely, but it's basically affecting anti-money laundering, which also indirectly affects terrorism. So these type of things need to have better scrutiny. With the SCAD and ICS, one of my favorite things to talk about is the water utility breach. So actually I have it listed here as a Valhalla Dam. It wasn't in Valhalla, it was in Westchester County, New York, just north of here, which basically supplies all the water for New York City. That's why New York City has the best water. It's not New York City, it's Westchester has the best water. New York City just steals it. There was a dam, a small little dam in Portchester, New York, called Bowman Avenue Dam. And the Iranian hacker group took control of it and tried opening up the dam. And they were successful. They were successful from a cyber perspective. What prevented all the water from leaking out of the dam was that dam had never been opened in 30 years and it was rusted shut. So, true story. You can look it up. I have the picture up here. So imagine, though, that was a great test bed for them, right? They got into a small system, right? It was probably unnoticeable, right? If the dam had been hacked, do you think they would have reported to federal authorities? Probably not. But that was their testing platform, right? Can we get the dam? Can we open the dam? So they were successful for all intents and purposes. I think if the sensors hadn't triggered that the door was rusted shut, they would have been really successful and nobody would have found out and they would have went out to bigger and better things. So real important to understand that, cybersecurity affects more than just money. The electrical grid, we've seen some of the power outages that we've had. Some were intentional, some are not so intentional. The big blackout a few years ago on the top quarter of the nation was a scaffolding effect by a trigger that worked its way down the line to bigger and bigger triggers. It was accidental, but that doesn't make me feel any better. I think accidental or nefarious, the weakness was there, and it had, again, bigger effects. Finally, I talked about the internet backbone. The internet backbone, even though it is itself cyber, it really has a lot of physical aspects to it. So if you think about BGP hacking, so BGP redirection, There's been, I think I counted at last count, 8 different cases of China redirecting traffic from the States to China and back into the States. What does this mean for us? Well, I'll leave my political views out of this, but I believe that there's information to be gained that China is using based on the traffic they're gathering, and they are very smart in assembling this data into transactions or into things that they can use to better either steal technology or steal intellectual property. I don't think they're really in it for stealing our credit cards. I think it's more about technical power, world power. Building access control systems. Big thing here. Again, being a firefighter, I always worry about when a building alarm goes off. If it's an entire building alarm, is someone setting it off nefariously? Is this being set off to offset a robbery or some other crime in place? These things have happened in the city. If you ever have a chance to go to the NYPD SHIELD meetings, they all talk about all the things that they've stopped that never make the news. Some of the terrorist attacks they even stop. So we see in the news, I think the count was they stopped 78 attacks that made the news, and they stopped about 250 attacks that never made the news. Again, all of them had a cyber component to it, and that's what kind of led them to be able to get involved early and stop those attacks. Transportation security. This one I love. We all know about taking over the plane's navigation system through the USB port, where Chris Roberts talks about that ad nauseum. Still hasn't proven it, but I imagine there is some truth to connecting the entertainment system to the navigation systems, as we saw in Jeeps and other vehicles. But the other thing I worry about is screening systems. Being able to infiltrate the network and be able to not so much take it down, but modify information. So screening systems show everything's good, right? Baggage systems show everything's good, and things can get through and lead to bigger issues like bombings and hijackings. That's really what bothers me the most about the transportation side of things. Finally, we'll talk about healthcare. As you saw Nina Ali talk about, medical device compromise is a big thing. I think the industry is taking it too lightly. I think there should be more of an urgency around that. If you imagine not so much taking over the device in a hospital, but taking over some personal device, the device that's attached to Dick Cheney maybe, right? So you think about remote assassinations or other items that can have damaging effects on the world economy or on the world political arena because of cyber. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So with the physically originated attacks, we talk about things that are physical that have an effect on cyber. When we talk about the internet backbone, I'll reverse it a little bit. Instead of BGP redirection, let's talk about the transatlantic cables, right? Anybody know the Google offices in New York? Do you know what that building is built on? So it's the old maritime facility, but do you know what it was before the maritime facility? Yeah, and you know the building because it has the porthole windows, right? Before the maritime facility, there was an AT&T building. That's where the transatlantic cables come in, and that's where they're trunked off. So you think Google is smart in doing the research and buying that building? Of course, right? Closer to the backbone. Anyway, now they're a target, right? You think about that. Having a physical effect on the internet by either tearing up the transoceanic cables or affecting that building, knowing where it comes in, can have a big effect on a lot of cyber services. Satellite systems, we've already seen some issues where hackers have taken over some of the satellite systems. Perhaps some defense systems, but I can't get into too much detail about that. But definitely some GPS navigation systems. So again, big effects on cyber as well as our military stature. Arson as a weapon. So, again, being a firefighter, we're always on the lookout for fires that happen in odd places And some of the reasons they happen in odd places, is because they want to have what they call a scaffolding effect in taking down a business or process or hiding something illicit that was being investigated, whether it's cyber or physical. One of my favorite things to talk about is electromagnetic pulses. So EMPs, anybody hear of EMPs? Yes? Where'd you hear about that? Okay, so weaponized EMPs, okay. They talk about the Carrington event in 1853, I believe, which was a solar flare, took out the telegraph system. That was the only electronic communication system at the time. If we had something like that today, it would be devastating. So there's a couple of different ways of looking at EMPs. There's small grade EMPs, weaponized EMPs, and when I talk about EMPs, I'm always talking weaponized. The small grade EMPs, which take up about the size of a van and can take out a data center or a power plant. Again, we talk about the devastating effects on that. If you're taking out a data center, right, you can bring down someone's business. Taking down an electrical grid has a much wider impact, but could also have the same target effect. Then we talk about upper atmospheric EMPs, and that's the one that scares me the most. So EMPs come and create three different types of signals, M1 through M3. The M3 signal is the longest, it's the most delayed signal, but it's the longest signal. So if you think about low frequency travels very far, this is a low frequency signal and what EMPs do is basically they overcapacitate capacitors and burn them out. These upper atmospheric EMPs are generated by nuclear missiles. So I worry about some countries like North Korea, where they may not be building a rocket to hit the United States, but they may be building a rocket to explode up in the atmosphere. Up in the atmosphere over the California coast means that all of California or the Pacific Northwest or the Pacific Southwest could be basically in a blackout stage. And blackout not meaning that the grid's going to come back up. Blackout meaning that the transformers are gone, the computer systems are gone. Anything that has a capacitor or resistor has been burnt. So if you think about that and think about the effects, you don't just turn on the power by changing the grid, right? You don't just replace the transformer. Some of these big transformers, by the way, are made in China and have a 18-month lead time. So if you think about these upper atmospheric EMPs, that probably scares me the most of anything. So now that I've scared you twice today, let's talk about some of the ways we can identify and prepare ourselves for this. First thing we need to do is we need to know what type of attack we are experiencing. Is it an operational attack? Meaning, is it something that's going against our business directly, right? Is it something that is trying to disrupt our operations for the sake of us being the direct target? The targeted attacks are really things that happen, but in a delayed fashion. Again, we are the target, but it's not a operational issue. It's basically a C2, a command and control issue. So where an operational attack has an immediate effect on our operations, i.e. taking down the data center, a targeted attack is basically hacking our data center and doing damage over time, bigger damage over time. And then there's the indirect attack. Target is probably the best known for that, right? You get into the HVA systems, right? So the HVAC systems was an indirect attack on target, but who got hacked? The HVAC systems, right? With AWS, the hacker who just stole all that data from AWS was a contractor to AWS, right? So again, who's at fault? It wasn't AWS directly, it was that third party, but we never hear about that. So understanding how you're being attacked or why you're being attacked is really, really important in your awareness. So how did this all come about? I'll take a step back. In InfraGard, I being both cyber and physical, I had met a lot of people across the years. One was Lieutenant Colonel, retired from the Marines, Robert Darling. Bob Darling was the communications coordinator in the bunker for 9/11. Wrote a book on it. It's an amazing book. If you don't like reading, just skip to the chapter about the Clintons and you'll be amazed. Has anybody read the book? No? Okay. Anyway, interesting book. It's a quick read. Anyway, so Bob goes around the nation talking about crisis management from a physical level. InfraGard, we talked about crisis management from a cyber level. So we got together and we tried to figure out how we can kind of combine the two, or can we use the aspects of physical resiliency to help the cyber resiliency. And we came up with a two-part white paper on cyber physical control, and that's kind of what we're doing today, the second half of it. With Bob Darling's Turning Point Crisis Management Group, he has come up with an acronym, Start Doing More to Live, and each one of those is a action we should be taking. So sensing, doing or decisioning, making, right, terminating, and lessons learned, right? Start doing more to live. So, I think a few years ago I gave a similar topic on this, and we just kind of focused on cyber. Today we're going to do a little recap. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I'm basically sitting between you and the raffle for the computer laptop, right? So we'll just go quickly through the topic and then talk about how cyber and physical how we need to adjust ourselves for cyber and physical. So basically, it's sensing is that deja vu moment, that gut feeling you get. Is something wrong? You know, how many people get that? And you know, how many people play sports and you get that right before you go on the field, or right? I play ice hockey, and I've done that 2 times. And one time I broke my collarbone, the other time I broke my ankle. It's just something told me not to get on the ice, but I was stupid and I did it anyway. But your gut feeling is there. It's a natural reaction to something, right? When your hair stands up on end, right, it means something's wrong. And sensing is that feeling, right? That feeling where even if you're in the cyber world and you hear about something that happens with a car accident or a possible terrorist or an active shooter, something makes your hair stand up on end, saying something doesn't make sense with this. Maybe there's something more to it. Or if you're in the physical world, right, you hear about some hacking incident and you're saying, wow, they could have really done damage to XYZ, to the power plant, right? So sensing is that feeling you get, and you should pay attention to it because it's really important. Now, what do you do when you do pay attention to it? Well, in the talk I gave a few years ago, I said, well, get your group together and let's talk about it. Let's figure out what's going on. Well, I'm expanding this. What's your group? If you're a cyber manager, your security manager, or a technology manager, who's your group? Well, it's usually your boss or some VP or someone in the SOC or someone in the technology area, and you say, hey, what's going on? There's something else going on. I'm saying now we should start including facilities managers. We should start including some corporate security. We need to understand that, hey, the servers went out at this data center. Is there something going on? And maybe this physical security personnel is saying, hey, the president of the company is visiting that data center tomorrow. Related? Most likely, right? So you need to start involving physical security. I know where I work, which I cannot disclose, I have a good relationship with not only the facilities and security managers for those all the real estate in this enterprise. I also have a relationship with the personnel protection services. Why do I do that? Well, I have my ear to the ground, right? The personnel protection folks call me whenever something happens at one of their branches. And I'll find out, hey, is something else going on? I'll reach out to physical security, and then I'll reach out to the cybersecurity saying, hey, do you have this on tape? Is there something we should be doing? So it's good to have that. So that's sensing. Do you have any questions about that? Feel free to interrupt me while I'm talking. I tend to talk a lot. So let's talk about decision making. So here we are. We've decided that something is wrong. We need to take action. Our management, our chain of command is not available, or it's going to be too lengthy to get to them. We now take control, right? We say we're going to do the call to action. This is now, how do we expand that? Well, our call to action is we need a seat at the table with these other groups. We need to know what's going on. We need to be part of that conversation. If they have something going on, a few years ago we had the car that went through Times Square. I happened to be in DC at that time, and I got notified of it from the Citizen app. Anybody have Citizen app? So I'm in DC. I see this on the Citizen app. I called the local building and I said, does anybody know about this? And they're like, oh yeah, we know about this. I said, does anybody know, it was lunchtime, anybody know how many of our employees are out at lunch right now? Well, we didn't think about that, right? So all of a sudden I got the facilities manager, I got the department manager on the phone, and I said, listen, I'm a cybersecurity guy. That's all I am. But I heard this happen. What's going on? And how many people could be affected? 7,500 people were out to lunch during that time in that 3-block radius. So, if you have to have a seat at the table, you have to get these folks together to talk. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. Since that time, they do send out emails and alerts to the employees whenever something happens in that immediate area. Big thing, because accountability, right? I'm a cybersecurity guy. I do care about people, but that's not my job. But because of this, we've changed our way we work. Second thing, leadership. So in my talk a few years ago, leadership was all about taking the lead, not dealing with your leadership, but you being a leader. You have to step up. Like JC had said in the panel, you could have crises thrown upon you, but leadership doesn't come automatically out of that. It has to be practiced. So how do you deal with leadership especially when you're in the cyber world and someone else is in the physical world? Who takes the lead? This is something you have to work out ahead of time. This is something, because of your constant communication with the other leaders in the other groups, you could say, if you hear something and you have that communication, it doesn't matter who takes the lead because you already have that relationship. They're going to trust what you bring to the table, and you're going to trust what they bring to the table. So if you say, I heard something happen in Times Square, they could easily say, well, you're the cyber guy. Get the hell out of here, right? But they didn't. They said, oh, okay, let's look into this. Let's find out more about it. Let's find out what could have happened, right? Threat modeling. And finally, let's talk about triage. So when we talk about decisioning, we all have our different perspectives. And when we're sharing that leadership with the other groups, especially with groups that aren't in our realm, we have to understand how to compromise, right? Congruence or a decision isn't always 100% agreement. But we have to make decisions based on what's the priority, right? So making. So making is that call to action. We've now had our leadership. We've had our talks. We have decided that something needs to be done. We've figured out what needs to be done. How do we execute it? Who executes it, right? So when you're dealing with any cyber, physical threat, any type of threat, even cyber these days, IDLH, immediate danger to life and health. IDLH is your #1 priority. I don't care if you're losing millions, right? You don't want to make the news saying that X got injured or X died because you didn't take a system down in time, or because, and I'll use trains, right? Signaling systems. Signaling systems go awry because of a cyber attack. Do you stop the trains altogether? Or do you let the trains run and just take the chance of doing manual switching? Well, if someone dies or gets hurt, manual switching answer is wrong, right? So when you get into meaning or making, you have to make sure that life is your #1 priority. And if upper management doesn't like that, or people push back on it, bring it up. What's more important, right? What's the value of a life? All right, so the second thing is coordinating activities. We need to understand now that once we've taken care of the life safety issue, what happens first? With cyber, it's easy, right? We follow a playbook, right? Almost everything has a playbook. And actually, physical security has the same thing too. They have a playbook. The problem becomes is when these things are intermingled, whose playbook, what steps happen first, what are the effects of each step? So when you have these relationships with the physical security folks, do that tabletop. Have a tabletop exercise. where you know it's going to be intermingled, and then have both of you pull out your playbooks and run through them and see where it conflicts, see where things don't make sense, right? This is all pre-planning, right? Being able to do these things. And finally, you have to be flexible. Not every incident is the same. You know, the playbooks are guidelines to me. The playbooks are not prescriptive. They need to have some flexibility, especially when you're dealing with things that you've never seen before or things that go outside of your wheelhouse. So let's assume that we've not killed anybody and that we've properly identified all the sources of our angst, and we've remediated them, and we've gotten a recovery point. How do we return to operations? Right? So from a cyber perspective, RTO, return to operations, is easy. We have a playbook of that. We know exactly what to do and when to do it. If we go back to the train with the signaling systems, when do we turn those signaling systems back on? Is there a test period? Do we need to have people actually out in the field looking to make sure it works the way it's supposed to work? With the dam, when the dam systems were restored, did someone actually go out and look to make sure the door wasn't going to open, right? That maybe the rust didn't loosen up. So we have to kind of finish the job, right? And being able to terminate, you have to be coordinating your termination. You can't terminate too early before someone else is still doing something, and vice versa. And I have here what communication, and Bob Darling added confirmation. So we're on the same page. And finally, lessons learned, right? Debriefing. Again, this goes back to your relationship between between physical and cyber. Your debriefing should be held together. You can have mini debriefings alone afterwards, but your first debriefing should be as a group to understand all the different aspects, what you missed, who you should have brought in. Should you have brought legal in? Should you have brought some of the executive management in? Should you have brought some of the authorities in? Should you have brought the news in, the media? Sometimes the media can help you if you handle them in the right way. Well, who handles the media? Cybersecurity doesn't. Does physical security? No, there's a whole different group on that. So does that mean we have to now include them in all our planning and pre-planning? Yeah, possibly. So it's important. Also, when you're talking about changes, I hate process. I'll tell you right now. Processes are noble things that have gone bad during execution. What do I mean by that? You can have a process or a policy or a law or regulation that means well, but when it gets executed, it's executed word for word or without context. Same thing when we get into the debriefings. If we start changing our playbooks, we have to make sure we're flexible, that we create context around those playbooks, right? So the lessons learned need to document those contextual situations and add them to your playbook. So that way you don't say, I need to shut off the signaling systems. Well, do you need to shut them off all the time? No, maybe you need to shut them off during working hours, right? Or during operating hours or during rush hour. Perhaps that context doesn't make sense when they're already being in testing phase or something like that. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. And again, it's really not a lot of new content here, but it's a lot of now integration, a lot of sharing. Like I said in the very beginning this morning, security is all about sharing. Being safe is all about sharing information, and we need to extend that not just amongst our community, but folks in the technology industry, folks in the physical security industry, folks in the operational industry, right? OT. I go to an OT meeting quarterly, held by a large clearinghouse in Jersey City, and great group. They tackle some of the biggest problems with shadow IT and all these other issues, and I'm the only cybersecurity guy there. They don't even know I'm cybersecurity. They think I'm an OT guy too. So I ask them, why aren't you inviting the cybersecurity folks from your own company here? Oh, they don't deal with this. So I walked around the corner to the cybersecurity guy, who I know very well, and I said, hey, there's an OT meeting going on here? Like, Oh, wow, we would love to be in on that. We need to understand what they do so we can do our stuff better. So here's clear miscommunication or clear division in the same company for user groups that should involve more than just their narrow field. Of course, they did not like that I went around and talked to the cybersecurity folks, but I'm fixing that. So it's important. It really is important. It's more important than you think. Cybersecurity is really more important than you think. All right, so that's my spiel. I'll stick with it. Any questions? Anybody have any good stories about any events that they can talk about in their company that may have had a physical effect? That's good. Silence is good because you don't want to disclose your company, right? Sure. What would you like to know about EMPs?
I don't know anything, but if everybody else is already kind of aware of the EMPs and what the overall scope and risk and how frequent and how often they're used by different countries, maybe it's not a use of your time, but if everybody else is interested.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what I can and can't talk about. So yeah, there's a good group within InfraGard, a special interest group, which has actually gone to Congress and has written 2 books and several white papers presented to Congress on regulating EMPs. Not so much regulating because we want to control them, but regulating saying that we can now consider them weapons. Up until now, they really aren't considered weapons. And up until most recently, Congress has forbid the groups to actually talk about weaponized EMPs. All our white papers were talked about solar flares or natural EMPs, weather-related EMPs, they call them, which was interesting because, yes, the effects are the same, but I think I don't understand why they didn't want to. I think they thought they were going to raise too much of a panic by calling it weaponized. But the reality is it's weaponized. And electromagnetic pulses?
Yeah, what is it, in what state or form is it in?
So it's basically electricity going through the air. So an EMP is an explosion that has an effect of moving electrons. So if you think about electrons moving over a wire is electricity. Electrons moving over the air is still electricity, but they call them EMPs, electromagnetic pulses. And they actually go in waves and pulses. There's a frequency it follows. If you think about AC runs at a 60 hertz cycle, which is a cycle every, that's actually, your old TVs ran on a 60 hertz cycle. That's why when you try and videotape your TV, it goes, you see the blinking? That's a 60 hertz cycle. So that's a pulse. So EMPs operate in the same way. And there's 3 different levels of pulses. The higher frequencies, the M1s, are short bursts, very damaging, but they're very short-lived. The M2s are a little bit more damaging, but again, they're pretty short-lived. And I'm talking about short-lived like milliseconds. The M3s can last for hours. The M3s are very long-wave pulses. And it's very slow, but then they cause capacitors to build up over time, and then the capacitors themselves degrade or basically overflow. So that's basically what an EMP is. It's electricity over the air. Anything else you want to know about that? It's a real interesting topic because I believe we're just starting to see the use cases on this now. I believe there's going to be a lot more use cases that we don't know about that are going to happen. Especially what they call targeted EMPs, like the small model ones. The one I talked about that can fit in a van, can take out a whole data center. The military uses EMPs, by the way, in that form for finding landmines. So those pulses, those electrical pulses will cause landmines to go up. So they'll shoot them in an area where they think there's landmines and pre-detonate them.
So what are the securities around protection, like against EMPs?
So if you were talking about protecting your electronic devices, your microwave, Faraday cages. So your microwave is a Faraday cage. If you think of a Faraday cage, it's basically a cage that's made out of copper wire that's at a certain distance, and those distances between the copper wires, they trap the electricity, right? They prevent that electricity from going through to the device you want. So depending on the level of Faraday cage, you can protect different levels of EMPs. Now, a microwave is pretty small. What can you put in there? And by the time you figure out you need to put something in there, it's probably going to be too late. But there are large Faraday cages, things that are the size of a box truck, that are used for testing EMP. So most of the companies that have those large Faraday cages are companies that deal with EMP issues for the electrical grid. There's also a lot of technologies out there, and I can't verify them, but I've heard of them, where they actually put sort of like lightning rods in the electrical grid or power plants, and supposedly they're supposed to capture the electricity or gather the electricity before it can hit any of the equipment. Again, I don't know the actual viability of those things. I've seen the presentations on them. I don't believe anything I see anyway. So, any other questions?
I mean, are these viable solutions for protecting electric grids or like huge
So,
big stuff?
all right, so this is a great scenario. So say you can protect the electric grid. Suppose that power plant, right, has these devices, and these devices actually work. Let's just assume it does. So this power plant has these devices, and the upper atmospheric EMP goes off, and this power plant is protected. Who are they going to deliver the electricity to? Because everyone who's using that electricity has now been affected by that EMP. Right?
True.
So, yeah, you can generate all electricity you want. You're safe. Who are you delivering it to? Where's it going? Right? Maybe someone else who has another Faraday cage. But then those transmission lines across the way that have those nice little PCB-filled transformers are blown too. So there's a lot of issues, with protecting against them that just aren't, I think, viable. Right? They're good at what they do, but I think you have to think of the whole picture when it comes to EMPs. All right, so I scared everyone for the third time today. All right, so on the questions, thank you very much. Well, everyone there?